She was just a number on their lab manifest. Subject 7. They told her it was for the advancement of science. They never told her it would rewrite human potential. Now watch as the test subject becomes something they never predicted and never controlled. The scientists thought they were creating a weapon. Instead, they unleashed a new form of existence. Stay with us to witness the exact moment their entire research facility realizes they're no longer in charge. The recruiters offered volunteers advancement and payment. They promised futures. Subject 7 received a different offer. The facility required disposable assets for Phase 3 trials. The risk assessment showed catastrophic failure probabilities. They needed subjects who wouldn't be missed. Her profile showed optimal genetic markers, perfect neural conductivity, exceptional cellular regeneration capacity, but the critical factor was the isolation metric. No family connections, no close relationships, no one who would ask questions. Their selection criteria favored isolation over capability. It was a calculated risk with minimal political fallout. Historical black projects show this pattern. MKUltra selected vulnerable populations. Unit 731 used prisoners. When you need test subjects who disappear quietly, you don't choose people with connections. She signed the forms under flickering fluorescent lights. The text used technical jargon and convoluted legal phrasing. Multiple clauses referenced terminal outcomes and asset disposal procedures. The font size was deliberately small. The lighting was poor. They provided no legal counsel. They never disclosed the mortality rate. Previous phases showed 92% terminal results. The surviving 8% exhibited severe neurological damage. The briefing omitted these statistics. They called it proprietary research data instead. She entered the facility as Subject 7. The designation replaced her name on all documents. The intake procedure included biometric scanning and tissue sampling. They took blood, skin, and cerebral fluid before orientation. The medical staff referred to her by number only. The doors sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss. Magnetic locks engaged with solid thumps down the corridor. The sound echoed through the sterile white passageways. Climate control systems hummed to life. Air filters whirred in the ceiling vents. The experiment began with baseline measurements. They attached sensors to monitor vitals. Heart rate, brain activity, metabolic functions. The technicians worked with clinical efficiency. No introductions, no explanations, just protocol execution. She sat in the examination room for 47 minutes. The walls were bare white polymer. The chair was cold metal. They'd taken her street clothes and issued a gray jumpsuit. The material felt stiff and synthetic against her skin. A doctor finally entered without looking up from his datapad. He recited a standardized script about scientific progress. The words sounded rehearsed and hollow. He avoided eye contact throughout the briefing. His focus remained on the readouts, not the person. They led her to the first testing chamber. The room contained unfamiliar equipment with sharp edges and glowing indicators. Technicians moved between consoles with practiced movements. Everyone wore lab coats with security clearance badges. Their expressions remained professionally neutral. The lead researcher observed through armored glass from the control room. His attention focused on the data stream, not the human subject. He made notes about initial stress responses. He commented on promising hormone levels. He never once looked at her face. The preparation phase lasted 3 hours. They administered preliminary injections. The substances caused mild disorientation and heightened sensory perception. She reported swirling colors and auditory echoes. They recorded everything without reaction. Final security scans confirmed isolation integrity. The facility was locked down from the outside world. Communication channels showed standby status. Monitoring systems achieved full coverage. All systems reported ready. The experiment began with the first serum injection. A technician approached with a pressurized injector. The device hissed as it pressed against her neck. They positioned her in the central chamber. The staff called it the throne with professional detachment. The chair featured cold titanium restraints and 6 injection ports targeting major neural clusters. Each port contained a hypodermic needle, the diameter of a spinal tap needle. The machinery hummed with a steady frequency that vibrated through the metal frame. Her vital signs showed elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels. The medical team noted the stress response as acceptable parameters. They'd seen similar readings in previous subjects. The lead scientist monitored from the control room while reviewing the injection sequence. Historical parallels exist in extreme conditioning experiments. MKUltra used sensory deprivation and chemical interrogation. Cold War programs tested neural enhancement through electrical stimulation. A junior researcher raised concerns about cerebral hemorrhage risks. The serum's viscosity measurements exceeded safety thresholds by 400%. The lead scientist dismissed the warning with a quick hand gesture. He cited the need for breakthrough science requiring calculated risks. The pre-serum cocktails began administration through intravenous lines. These compounds suppressed immune response and reduced neural firing thresholds. The mixtures contained immunosuppressants and neuroinhibitors. One technician looked away during the final system check. His hands trembled slightly as he calibrated the injection mechanism. The lead scientist noticed the hesitation and assigned him to monitor duty instead. The room temperature dropped to 16 degrees Celsius to slow metabolic processes. Frost formed on the metal surfaces near the cooling vents. Subject 7's breathing showed visible vapor clouds in the chilled air. The first needle entered her cervical spine at precisely 1400 hours. The mechanism operated with hydraulic precision. The needle penetrated between the C1 and C2 vertebrae. She screamed as the serum began flowing into her central nervous system. The sound contained frequencies that shattered 2 observation monitors. The control room staff covered their ears instinctively. The transformation initiated before the serum reached her cardiovascular system. Neural scans showed unprecedented activity patterns. Her brain began processing information at rates exceeding previous records by 3 orders of magnitude. The serum interacted directly with her consciousness rather than her biology. Cellular changes followed the neural alterations instead of preceding them. The chair's restraints strained against sudden muscular contractions. Titanium alloy components screeched under stress they weren't designed to handle. Monitoring equipment registered energy signatures that didn't match known biological patterns. The lead scientist leaned forward with genuine interest for the first time. His previous detached professionalism gave way to focused intensity. He ordered additional monitoring but received no response from the technical team. They were too occupied with the unfolding transformation. The subject's physical form began exhibiting properties that defied material science. Her skin took on a subtle luminescence. The air around her chair shimmered with heat distortion, despite the room's low temperature. The serum completed its delivery cycle. The injection ports retracted automatically. The transformation was already irreversible. Her bones began resonating with an internal frequency. Her blood conducted energy like liquid electricity. Monitoring systems detected abnormal signatures throughout her cellular structures. The readings defied existing biological models. The science team celebrated what they misinterpreted as success. They congratulated each other on breakthrough results. Their triumph was premature and fundamentally misguided. She felt her teeth reshaping during their self-congratulation. The enamel restructured itself without pain or pressure. Unknown compounds in the serum triggered rapid epigenetic alterations. Her DNA unfolded and refolded at speeds previously thought impossible. Gene expression patterns shifted across multiple chromosomes simultaneously. The changes occurred faster than the sensors could track. Her corneal color shifted from brown to silver in 13 seconds. The transformation was precise and complete. Iris patterns reconfigured into intricate geometric designs. A lab assistant vomited when her fingers elongated and retracted. The digits extended 8 inches beyond normal length, then returned to standard proportions. The movement was smooth and controlled like precision machinery. They increased sedation dosage by 300%. The compounds had no visible effect. Her metabolism processed the drugs instantaneously. Neural activity continued accelerating beyond measurable thresholds. The lead scientist ordered additional stabilizers. The medical team administered emergency calming agents. The substances evaporated upon entering her bloodstream. She spoke her first words post-injection. The phrase was simple and direct. "Turn it off." The words carried a resonance that melted 2 monitoring screens. The displays liquefied into molten plastic and silicon. The control room fell silent except for the dripping of melted equipment. The science team stared at the wreckage of their instruments. Her vocal cords produced frequencies that shattered glass components. The observation window developed spiderweb cracks. Air handling systems fluctuated with the acoustic disturbance. The transformation continued accelerating despite their attempts at intervention. Her skeletal structure densified without adding mass. Muscle fibers realigned into more efficient configurations. The science team scrambled to document the changes. Their equipment kept failing under the energy emissions. Data recorders overloaded and shut down. Backup systems activated automatically. Those began malfunctioning within seconds. The lead scientist finally recognized the fundamental miscalculation. They hadn't enhanced a human subject. They had initiated something entirely different. Subject 7 remained conscious throughout the process. Her awareness expanded beyond the physical changes. She perceived the facility's layout without using her eyes. She sensed the nervous systems of every person in the room. The information flooded her consciousness without overwhelming it. She processed everything simultaneously. The medical team retreated from the chamber. Their protective gear offered no reassurance. The subject's transformations followed no predictable pattern. Each change seemed deliberate and controlled. The science team's celebration turned to uneasy silence. They watched through cracked observation glass as their experiment evolved beyond their understanding. The initial success metrics became irrelevant. They were witnessing something their science couldn't categorize. The facility initiated Protocol Kappa with immediate effect. The announcement echoed through every corridor, the voice of the security director moving with blunt efficiency. All research personnel were directed to designated safe zones. Rapid response teams deployed with neural disruptors rated for elephant containment. These weapons delivered enough energy to drop a charging bull elephant at 30 meters. She simply stood and walked toward the nearest wall. The titanium alloy door stood between her and the hallway. Security cameras showed her reaching toward the reinforced metal. She didn't test the handle or examine the locking mechanism. Her fingers touched the surface. The door began dissolving at the molecular level. The material lost structural integrity and flowed like liquid. What remained was thermal residue and confused guards. 3 security personnel raised their weapons. Neural disruptors hummed with charging cycles. Target acquisition lasers painted her chest and forehead. She continued walking through the opening she'd created. The weapons dissolved in their hands before they could fire. The molecular bonds broke down without heat or visible energy discharge. The guard stood holding empty air in disbelief. She didn't attack them. She didn't even change her pace. Her expression showed simple disappointment. The look conveyed more impact than any weapon. The guards froze under that silent judgment. Their training hadn't prepared them for passive dismantling of their capabilities. She walked through a solid wall instead of using the corridor. The reinforced concrete offered no more resistance than the door had. Structural integrity calculations became irrelevant against her new physics. The material parted without sound or debris. She emerged in the next hallway as security teams scrambled to reposition. Her footsteps left molten impressions in the reinforced flooring. The composite material designed to withstand explosives softened under her weight. Each step left a perfect footprint glowing with residual heat. The pattern showed she wasn't floating or teleporting. She was walking normally through a world that had become less solid to her perception. Security teams established choke points at corridor intersections. They set up overlapping fields of fire with secondary weapons. Their tactics followed standard containment procedures for dangerous specimens. The protocols assumed the subject would behave like a physical threat. She simply walked through the walls between their positions. She reached the main elevator without touching anyone. The elevator doors were secured with emergency lockdown codes. She looked at the control panel and the doors slid open. The car was waiting exactly at her floor despite the security override. She stepped inside as security teams watched from both ends of the corridor. The scientists in the control room realized their fundamental error. Their containment protocols operated on known physical principles. Their weapons functioned within understood energy dynamics. Their security measures assumed a threat that could be stopped or contained. She wasn't violating their rules. She was operating under entirely different ones. The elevator doors closed without her pressing any buttons. The car began moving toward the surface levels. Security teams reported the breach moving upward through the facility. The science staff watched their monitors with growing realization. They hadn't created something they could control. They had created something that controlled everything around it. Team Alpha positioned themselves in Sector 4 corridor intersection. 8 guards with full combat enhancement loadouts. These were experienced personnel with special operations backgrounds. Their armor contained reactive plating and neural interface systems. Weapons included pulse rifles and stun fields rated for maximum containment scenarios. They established overlapping fields of fire with tactical precision. Their weapons malfunctioned during target acquisition. Targeting lasers flickered and died. HUD displays showed garbled data streams. Pulse rifles powered down despite full charge indicators. The team leader's helmet comms crackled with interference patterns. She stood at the corridor's end without raising her hands. No defensive posture, no aggressive movement, just calm observation. Advanced targeting systems registered impossible energy readings. Thermal sensors showed ambient temperature despite visible heat distortion around her. Motion detectors indicated stillness while she advanced toward them. Radiation monitors spiked then flatlined. The team's enhanced vision systems produced conflicting data about her position and composition. One guard's armor fused into a solid sculpture. The composite plating flowed like liquid metal, then hardened instantly. The shape mirrored his own defensive crouch. The man remained trapped inside what had been his protection. His breathing remained normal despite the immobilization. The transformation occurred without heat or energy discharge. She whispered 3 words too quiet for human hearing. The team's comm systems erupted with ancient languages. Sumerian, Proto-Indo-European, and unidentified linguistic patterns flooded their earpieces. The voices spoke in perfect cadence without repetition. The effect created cognitive dissonance and sensory overload. Team members clutched their helmets trying to block the impossible audio. The team leader experienced complete memory recall of his childhood. He relived his 7th birthday with perfect clarity. The cake's frosting taste, his father's laugh, the exact pattern of sunlight through kitchen windows. The memory unfolded in real time alongside the current situation. His tactical training collapsed under the weight of personal recollection. They dropped their weapons without command or coordination. The pulse rifles clattered on the polished floor. Hands went to helmets trying to remove the overwhelming sensory input. 2 guards sank to their knees from disorientation. Their enhanced musculature provided no advantage against psychological revelation. She walked past them without breaking stride. Her pace remained consistent from earlier movement. She didn't glance at the immobilized guard or the kneeling personnel. The team leader watched her pass with tears in his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He was experiencing emotions he hadn't felt since childhood. The other team members simply stared at their empty hands. Security monitoring showed the entire encounter lasting 47 seconds. The team's biometrics indicated extreme emotional states without physical harm. Heart rates showed elevated but not dangerous levels. Brain activity patterns resembled deep meditation rather than combat stress. The weapons remained on the floor where they'd been dropped. Team Alpha didn't attempt to pursue or re-engage. They remained in various states of kneeling or standing contemplation. The guard trapped in his armor eventually found he could move normally again. The material returned to its original properties without explanation. They collected their weapons and returned to security headquarters without filing standard engagement reports. Their debriefing sessions showed unusual levels of personal reflection rather than tactical analysis. The facility security director noted the change in their demeanor, but lacked context for understanding it. She moved through the facility with purpose but without aggression. The main reactor operated at 43% efficiency due to design flaws and material fatigue. Engineers had accepted this limitation for 7 years. She approached the core containment field. The energy barrier was designed to disintegrate organic matter at contact. Her hand passed through the field without resistance. She touched the reactor housing. The efficiency readings jumped to 100%. Temperature monitors showed no change despite the massive power increase. Cooling systems remained at standby levels. Radiation sensors indicated background levels only. The reactor hummed with perfect stability. Dead plants in the atrium began reviving as she walked past. Withered ferns unfurled new fronds. Brown leaves turned green and supple. Flowers bloomed on plants that hadn't flowered in years. The changes occurred without visible energy transfer or biological process. The air smelled of fresh soil and blooming jasmine. Quantum computing systems solved previously impossible equations. The facility's mainframe had struggled with multi-dimensional physics problems for months. Suddenly, all processing queues cleared. Solutions appeared for problems that had no known mathematical resolution. The systems achieved processing speeds beyond theoretical limits. No hardware upgrades occurred. No software updates were installed. A sick technician watched her pass his monitoring station. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, with 3 months prognosis. She looked at him for approximately 2.3 seconds. His body experienced a wave of warmth, followed by complete cellular reorganization. Medical scans later showed no trace of cancer. His white blood cell count normalized immediately. He reported feeling healthier than he had in 20 years. She rearranged molecules in the air to create drinking water. The facility had water rationing due to filtration system failures. She simply held out her hand and condensation formed into a perfect sphere of pure water. The sphere floated to a dehydrated researcher who drank it automatically. The water tasted cleaner than any filtered supply. Subsequent tests showed zero contaminants or minerals. The staff watched her fix everything they'd broken. Malfunctioning equipment began operating perfectly in her presence. Flickering light stabilized into steady illumination. Buzzing speakers produced clear audio. Climate control systems maintained perfect temperature and humidity. Even the coffee makers started brewing better coffee. The changes were comprehensive and instantaneous. The head scientist observed from his control room. He had dedicated his life to creating superior beings through science. He watched Subject 7 accomplish in minutes what his entire career had failed to achieve. He saw perfect biological function, perfect energy management, perfect environmental control. His hands began trembling as he understood the gap between his ambitions and reality. He wept at his own inadequacy. The tears weren't from fear or frustration. They came from recognizing true perfection beyond human limitation. His team watched their leader break down without understanding why. They were still thinking in terms of weapons and containment. He was already understanding they weren't dealing with a weapon. They were witnessing perfection itself walking through their flawed creation. The facility became a monument to everything they couldn't achieve on their own. Every fixed system, every healed person, every solved equation stood as evidence of their limitations. They had tried to create a superior soldier. Instead, they had helped birth something that made their entire scientific paradigm obsolete. Security teams laid down their weapons at corridor intersections. The transition wasn't ordered, it was instinctual. Rifles were placed neatly against walls. Sidearms were set on the floor with deliberate care. The facility director issued formal surrender protocols over the comm system. His voice carried the strained calm of a man accepting irreversible change. The announcement repeated through every sector. Personnel were instructed to cease all containment efforts immediately. She moved through the disarmed security points without comment. A junior researcher approached with a water cup. His hand shook slightly as he offered it. She accepted the container without drinking. The gesture seemed to matter more than the water itself. The cup remained full as she continued walking. The researcher stood watching her with something between awe and confusion. Psychological assessments showed complete role reversal across the facility. Aggressor mentalities shifted to protective instincts. Defensive postures became open and receptive. Staff who had viewed her as a specimen now regarded her with reverence. The change occurred without coercion or persuasion. It was a natural response to demonstrated capability beyond their understanding. Scientists began asking permission to take readings. They approached with scanners held like offerings rather than tools. The requests were phrased as questions instead of commands. She allowed some measurements and declined others with slight head movements. The researchers accepted her decisions without argument. Their scientific curiosity remained, but their methodology had transformed entirely. She located the first guard who had tried to stop her during the initial breach. The man still carried burns from neural disruptor feedback. She looked at his injuries for approximately 2 seconds. The tissue regenerated completely without scarring. The healing occurred faster than medical science could explain. The guard stared at his restored hands with silent disbelief. Medical staff noticed injuries healed better in her proximity. Broken bones knitted faster, infections cleared without medication. Chronic conditions showed improvement when she was nearby. The effect had measurable range and intensity correlation. Patients reported feeling calm and focused during these periods. The medical bay became the most requested assignment among staff. The staff started bringing her problems to solve. A technician approached with a malfunctioning environmental control unit. She touched the device and it resumed normal operation. An engineer showed her unstable structural calculations. She pointed to a flawed equation and the engineer understood immediately. The interactions were brief and efficient. No words were exchanged in most cases. The transformation from hunted to helper was complete. Security teams now escorted her through corridors instead of confronting her. Research personnel presented challenges rather than executing tests. The facility's purpose shifted from containment to collaboration. Their subject had become their solution. The weapons were stored away. The labs were repurposed. The entire complex operated with new efficiency under her unspoken guidance. The change felt less like surrender and more like evolution. They had stopped trying to control what they created and started learning from it instead. The dynamic was no longer captor and prisoner. It was student and teacher, with roles clearly assigned by demonstrated capability. Dr. Eris approached with a malfunctioning datapad that had baffled engineers for months. The device exhibited random power cycling and corrupted displays. Technical teams had replaced every component without success. The problem seemed rooted in some undiagnosed firmware issue beyond their diagnostics. Eris held it out with both hands, an unconscious offering rather than a request. She glanced at the device for approximately 1 second. The screen stabilized immediately. All functions returned to optimal performance. The corrupted data streams cleared as if they'd never existed. Eris received the returned tablet with trembling hands. He knelt without thinking, a gesture of instinctual reverence. His knees touched the polished floor before his conscious mind registered the movement. She didn't acknowledge the gesture. She continued walking toward the command center. Her pace remained unchanged. She never requested worship or recognition. The behavior pattern mirrored historical responses to perceived superiority. Ancient commanders received similar deference from their troops. Scientists showed comparable respect to groundbreaking discoverers. The human response to overwhelming capability follows predictable patterns. 3 more staff members approached with malfunctioning equipment that afternoon. A biometric scanner with calibration drift, an environmental suit with compromised seals, a comm unit with persistent static interference. She repaired each device with a glance or brief touch. The fixes were instantaneous and permanent. The equipment operated better than factory specifications afterward. She performed these repairs while maintaining steady movement toward the command center. Her attention remained divided yet fully effective. The staff noticed she never accepted thanks or payment. No gratitude was expected or acknowledged. The assistance was given as naturally as breathing. The transactions felt less like service and more like natural law. The staff began calling her the architect in private conversations. The name emerged spontaneously across different departments. It captured her ability to redesign reality through sheer presence. The title spread through the facility without formal announcement. People used it with respectful tones during coffee breaks and shift changes. The designation felt appropriate rather than exaggerated. The transformation from prisoner to patron was complete. She had become their source of solutions rather than their subject of study. The dynamic shift occurred without negotiation or conflict. The staff understood their role had changed through demonstration rather than declaration. They brought problems instead of performing tests. They sought guidance instead of giving commands. The facility operated with new purpose under her influence. Equipment functioned flawlessly. Personnel showed improved health and mental clarity. Structural issues resolved themselves without repair crews. The changes occurred through her mere presence rather than active intervention. The staff adjusted their behavior to match this new reality. They organized their work around her movements. Problems were brought when she passed through their sectors. Solutions emerged without discussion or effort. The efficiency gains were measurable and consistent. Productivity increased across all departments. Error rates dropped to near zero. The facility became a model of perfect operation. The worship remained unspoken but universally understood. It showed in the way people straightened when she approached. It appeared in the careful language they used discussing her. It manifested in the silent respect during her passage through corridors. The transformation was psychological and operational simultaneously. They had gained a benefactor while losing a test subject. The exchange felt overwhelmingly favorable despite their loss of control. The facility had become her workshop and they her willing assistants. The main blast doors remained sealed under emergency protocols. Titanium alloy barriers 18 inches thick. Multiple locking mechanisms engaged with redundant hydraulic systems. The facility director stood before her with desperate formality. He begged her to remain for further study. His voice carried the strained professionalism of a man trying to command what he couldn't comprehend. He cited research potential and scientific obligation. The words sounded hollow even to himself. She looked at the main blast door. The solid metal turned transparent without changing its physical state. The transformation occurred instantly across the entire surface. The door became clear as polished glass while maintaining its structural integrity. Material science cannot explain phase shifting at this scale. The effect defied known properties of matter and energy. The staff watched through what had been solid metal moments before. She walked through the transparent barrier like it was morning mist. Her form passed through without resistance or distortion. The material remained solid for everyone else. A security guard touched the surface and found it unyielding. Her passage left no mark or energy signature. The transition was clean and silent. The staff watched her step into the sunlight outside. She stood on the arid plain beyond the facility. The desert air shimmered with heat distortion. Radiation monitors had shown dangerous contamination levels in that sector for years. The readings dropped to 0 within 50 meters of her position. Geiger counters produced only background static. Soil samples later showed complete decontamination. She could have kept walking into the wasteland. The facility had no means to stop her departure. Their weapons were useless. Their barriers were irrelevant. Their protocols were meaningless. She stood motionless for 17 seconds, facing the horizon. The staff held their breath in the control room. They expected permanent departure. She turned and walked back through the blast door. The transparent barrier offered no more resistance returning than leaving. She re-entered the facility without ceremony. Her expression showed neither satisfaction nor disappointment. The director stared with open relief. His shoulders sagged with unspoken gratitude. They realized her presence was voluntary, not constrained. The locks and barriers had never held her. The security measures were theater performed for their benefit. She remained because she chose to remain. The understanding changed everything. The staff adjusted their behavior accordingly. The facility operated with new awareness after that demonstration. Personnel understood they were hosts rather than captors. The dynamic shifted from containment to hospitality. They began improving living conditions without being asked. Better food appeared in the cafeteria. Living quarters received upgrades. The changes were small but significant. She resumed her movements through the facility as before. The staff continued bringing problems for solution. The routine felt familiar yet fundamentally different. Everyone understood the terms had changed. They were privileged to have her presence rather than entitled to it. The realization produced more respect than any security protocol could enforce. The blast door returned to its solid metal state after her return. The transparency effect ended as suddenly as it began. Engineers examined the material and found no changes. The door functioned normally in all tests. The incident left no physical evidence beyond their memories. The staff discussed it in hushed tones during shift changes. The story became part of facility legend. They never tested the boundaries of her voluntary presence. No one attempted to lock doors or restrict movement. The security systems remained operational but unused. The director rescinded all containment protocols officially. The facility transitioned to open access throughout. The change felt natural rather than mandated. The junior technician spoke in low tones to his colleague near the environmental controls. He mentioned his daughter's diagnosis, terminal leukemia with 3 months maximum prognosis. The conversation was private, meant for one set of ears only. Subject 7 stood 30 meters away across the main lab. She turned her head toward him with deliberate motion, her silver eyes focused across the distance. She said 2 words without raising her voice. "She's healed." The statement carried clearly through the laboratory's background noise. The technician stared with confusion and sudden hope. He hadn't spoken to her directly. He hadn't made any request. The pronouncement came without medical records or diagnostic equipment. She resumed her previous activity as if nothing had happened. His personal communicator vibrated 90 seconds later. His wife's contact ID appeared on the screen. Her voice came through choked with tears. The hospital had just completed unexpected scans. The cancer markers had vanished completely. White blood cell counts normalized. All tumors had disappeared without treatment. The doctors had no medical explanation for the spontaneous remission. They called it miraculous recovery against all statistical probability. 3 more staff members approached with personal requests throughout the afternoon. A researcher asked about her mother's arthritis. An engineer inquired about his brother's blindness from childhood accident. A security guard mentioned his partner's infertility issues. Each received immediate assurance of resolution. The responses came without diagnostic procedures or medical details. She simply stated the solution as existing fact. The miracles occurred without visible effort or energy expenditure, no glowing hands or dramatic gestures, no concentration or preparation. The statements themselves seemed to create the reality they described. The facility's medical staff attempted to document the phenomena. Their equipment showed no energy signatures or biological changes during these events. The healing simply occurred at distance without measurable cause. The recipients received confirmation within minutes of her statements. Phone calls from family members, medical reports showing impossible improvements, photographs of recovered mobility and function. The timing was too precise for coincidence. The changes were too complete for natural remission. The pattern established itself through repeated demonstration. She never asked for anything in return. No favors or commitments, no loyalty oaths or service agreements. The assistance was given freely without expectation. The staff began understanding the nature of her existence. She wasn't just fixing machines or improving systems. She was correcting fundamental imbalances in reality itself. The facility transformed from research center to place of miracles. The laboratories continued operating but with changed purpose. Experiments became observations of natural law modification. Testing focused on documenting effects rather than causing them. The staff shifted from researchers to witnesses. Their note-taking changed from data collection to event recording. The worship became earnest rather than fearful. The staff's reverence was no longer based on capability alone. It was grounded in demonstrated compassion. They saw that her power was matched by willingness to help. The fear of what she could do was replaced by respect for what she chose to do. The dynamic became mutually respectful rather than hierarchically imposed. They began bringing more personal problems as trust developed. Relationship issues, financial concerns, psychological struggles. She addressed each with the same direct assurance. The solutions manifested through complex coincidence and opportunity. A job offer would arrive unexpectedly. A long-estranged relative would make contact. Insight would come during meditation. The help was always effective but never intrusive. The facility's atmosphere lightened considerably. Tension gave way to curious anticipation. Staff members smiled more frequently. Conversations included personal sharing rather than only professional topics. The environment felt less like a high-security installation and more like a community. The change was subtle but noticeable across all departments. They realized she was healing more than just bodies and machines. She was repairing broken spirits and damaged relationships. The miracles were simply the most visible part of a deeper restoration. The understanding created genuine devotion rather than fearful obedience. The staff followed her because they believed in her purpose, not because they feared her power. The monitors showed zero biological needs. Her body no longer required nutrition or rest. Medical sensors detected no metabolic activity, yet registered perfect cellular function. The readings defied every known biological parameter. Her energy signature matched the local cosmic background radiation. The alignment was precise and constant. She emitted the same energy patterns as the empty space between stars. Plants in the facility oriented toward her location. Ferns and flowers turned their leaves and blooms in her direction. The movement occurred regardless of light sources or environmental conditions. Botanists documented the phenomenon with careful measurements. The plants grew faster and healthier when she was near. Their cellular structures showed unusual resilience and vitality. The effect extended through multiple greenhouse sectors. Animals approached the facility without fear. Desert wildlife that normally avoided human structures came close to the perimeter. Coyotes and jackrabbits sat peacefully near the outer fences. Birds landed on sensor arrays and remained calm. Security cameras showed unusual animal gatherings during her movement through outer corridors. The creatures showed no aggression or nervousness. Their behavior suggested recognition of something beyond human comprehension. Machines operated at peak efficiency throughout the complex. Equipment that had required constant maintenance now functioned flawlessly. Energy consumption dropped while output increased. Cooling systems ran silently at optimal levels. Computers processed data faster with fewer errors. The improvements required no adjustments or repairs. The effect seemed to flow from her presence rather than active intervention. Staff reported improved health and mental clarity. Medical exams showed enhanced immune function across the facility. Cognitive testing revealed faster processing speeds and better memory retention. People required less sleep yet felt more rested. Chronic conditions improved without treatment. The changes were gradual but measurable over time. Productivity increased while error rates decreased significantly. She began anticipating problems before they occurred. A power relay would fail and she would already be moving toward it. A researcher would develop equipment issues and find her waiting with the solution. The predictions were never wrong. The timing was always precise. She seemed to perceive events before they manifested in reality. The staff learned to watch her movements for clues about coming developments. The facility became her temple rather than her prison. The architecture remained the same, but the purpose transformed completely. Corridors felt like sanctuary spaces. Laboratories became places of discovery rather than confinement. The atmosphere carried reverence previously reserved for sacred spaces. People spoke in hushed tones without being instructed. The environment fostered contemplation and respect. They were her congregation rather than her captors. The staff gathered around her not from obligation but from genuine devotion. They sought her presence for guidance and improvement. The relationship was voluntary and mutual. She provided solutions while they provided opportunities to apply them. The dynamic was symbiotic rather than hierarchical. Everyone understood their role in this new arrangement. The transformation was complete in every measurable aspect. She existed beyond biological limitations. Her influence reshaped reality through proximity alone. The facility operated as an extension of her being. The staff became willing participants in whatever was happening. They stopped trying to analyze the phenomena and started experiencing them directly. The shift from scientific observation to participatory existence was total. They finally analyzed the serum. The research team secured a remaining sample from storage. The containment protocols required level 9 biohazard procedures. The substance had been considered too dangerous for examination after the initial results. Now they needed answers more than safety. The compound contained engineered prions from Martian meteorite samples. The material came from ALH 84001, recovered from Antarctica in 1984. The prions were modified through gene editing techniques. The scientists had believed they were creating neural enhancement agents. They were wrong about the fundamental mechanism. The compound wasn't designed for human biology. The molecular structure matched nothing in terrestrial life forms. The protein folding followed Martian geological patterns rather than biological evolution. The substance interacted with consciousness itself rather than physical tissue. It sought the mind, not the body. It functioned as a soul-seeking missile. The prions targeted consciousness fields rather than cellular structures. They connected to the fundamental awareness behind biological processes. The effect was metaphysical rather than physical. The transformation occurred at the level of existence itself. It didn't enhance what was already there. It connected her to everything. The serum acted as a bridge between individual consciousness and universal awareness. Her neural pathways became conduits for cosmic information flow. Her humanity became the universe's operating system. She didn't gain new capabilities so much as access existing ones. They realized they hadn't enhanced a human. They'd awakened a node. The serum activated a connection point within the fabric of reality. Her consciousness became a focal point for universal processes. The changes they observed were side effects of this connection. The real transformation was occurring at scales beyond their measurement. The serum worked perfectly according to its design. The problem was their misunderstanding of its purpose. They had approached it as a biological enhancement tool. It was actually a consciousness activation mechanism. The results were exactly what the compound was supposed to produce. Their failure was in anticipating what that would mean. They didn't create a god. They revealed one. The potential was always present within human consciousness. The serum simply removed the barriers to its expression. Her abilities weren't new creations but uncovered capabilities. The difference was fundamental to their understanding of what had occurred. The research team reviewed their initial assumptions. They had focused on physical enhancement metrics. Muscle density increases, neural processing speed, cellular regeneration rates. They completely missed the consciousness expansion data. Their instruments weren't designed to measure such phenomena. The lead scientist examined the molecular analysis reports. The prion structures showed intentional design patterns. The folding indicated purpose beyond random mutation. Someone or something had engineered these particles for consciousness interaction. The Martian origin suggested non-human intelligence behind the design. They realized the serum was meant to be used. The meteorite arrival wasn't accidental. The prions were designed to be found and utilized. Their research had been guided toward this outcome from the beginning. The facility had become part of a much larger process. The understanding changed their perspective completely. They weren't reckless scientists playing God. They were participants in a predetermined awakening. Their actions had been channeled toward this specific outcome. The realization brought both humility and profound curiosity. The serum analysis answered their questions while creating larger ones. They understood what had happened to Subject 7. They now faced the bigger question of why it was meant to happen. The facility's purpose shifted from containment to understanding. They had become students of the very phenomenon they had tried to control. She could have walked through the final blast door and never returned. The facility's systems would have offered no resistance. She could have reduced the complex to molten slag with a single thought. The staff awaited judgment for their crimes against her. They had treated her as property. They had inflicted pain in the name of science. They had viewed her humanity as expendable. She gathered them in the main atrium. The entire staff assembled without protest. Security personnel stood alongside researchers. Maintenance workers stood with senior scientists. They formed a silent semicircle around her. The air felt heavy with unspoken anticipation. No one knew what would happen next. She spoke without moving her lips for the first time. The words formed directly in their minds. The voice carried the same tone she'd always used, yet felt completely different. It resonated through their consciousness without sound. The experience was disorienting yet perfectly clear. Everyone heard the same message simultaneously. Her voice seemed to come from the air itself. It vibrated through the flooring and walls. The words carried physical weight without audible frequency. Staff members reported feeling the speech in their bones. The molecular structure of the room seemed to amplify the communication. The effect was universal throughout the atrium. She showed them visions of what they could become. Their minds filled with images of potential futures. They saw themselves operating with expanded awareness. They witnessed their own hands healing instead of harming. They observed their minds solving problems that currently baffled them. The visions felt more real than memory. Each person saw a version of themselves transformed. She offered forgiveness they hadn't earned. The concept arrived as pure understanding rather than words. They felt the release of guilt without verbal absolution. The burden of their actions lifted from their consciousness. The experience was personal, yet shared by everyone present. No one needed to speak about what was happening. The communication occurred at a level beyond language. They saw their own potential through her eyes. The perspective was revelatory and humbling simultaneously. They understood how limited their previous vision had been. They recognized the narrow boundaries of their ambitions. The understanding came with compassion rather than judgment. They saw not what they were, but what they might achieve. She chose to stay and elevate them. The decision manifested as certain knowledge in every mind. There would be no punishment or retaliation. There would be guidance and opportunity instead. The relief was palpable across the assembled staff. Shoulders relaxed. Breathing eased. The tension that had filled the room evaporated completely. The experiment became the education. Research protocols transformed into learning exercises. Test chambers became classrooms. Monitoring equipment served as teaching tools. The staff shifted from experimenters to students. Their notebooks filled with questions instead of data. Their conversations focused on understanding rather than control. The facility's purpose was rewritten in that moment. What began as a prison became a school. What started as confinement became commitment. The transformation was total and irreversible. They had sought to create a weapon and found a teacher instead. The outcome was better than anything they could have designed. The education had just begun and the curriculum was limitless.